That time an American was reincarnated into another world. Chapter 306, Annihilate Them Too. February 15th, 629. I stared at Anderson for a few seconds before suddenly looking toward the door to my workshop. Let me go? I need to shut it down. I already destroyed it. It's the only reason you woke up. So explain. Now. I stopped trying to remove his grip, which was no different from forged metal. I really couldn't imagine how strong he was. I gathered myself before finally speaking, deciding that I probably couldn't hide things, at least the obvious things. It was just supposed to be a communication device, like a node. It's capable of global communications using encoded magic. We use messages of isekai. That thing is no mere node. Nodes don't commune with the gods and beasts beyond the waters. My beacon doesn't either. It sends messages along the ionosphere, riding the invisible barriers around the planet and dropping the message wherever designated. I know it doesn't pierce the veil because I've tried to make it do so. Anderson stared at me before throwing me back onto the bed, stepping away and stopping in the middle of the room. Leave this place so I can work. I stared at him confusedly for a second before looking at Luna. She waved Amara and I out, the three of us leaving. Anderson bringing out a metal cross and a container of water. Luna closed the door behind us, Erhin there outside. We all silently walked to the living area to sit down. Luna only spoke a minute or so later, when she sensed that I had gathered myself, my heart rate coming down from over 200 BPM. John, you have no idea what kind of powers you've been playing with. That much is clear. You're lucky Amara called us so quickly. Hang on. I suddenly took off my shirt, looking down at my chest, and I saw that mark, black lines like a tattoo with odd shapes. I grit my teeth and took out a knife as Luna glared at me. Then I took it to my skin. I sheared off the tattoo, not just taking off a superficial layer, but taking it down to the muscle. I peeled the skin from my body, blood seeping down as the searing pain flooded my brain. I didn't make a sound, as if it could make up for what I had done earlier. When the patch of skin was off, and I could no longer see markings on my muscle, I showed the marking to Luna. What is this? An exchange. You may not have made a deal with whatever you talked to, but it still took something from you. Likely your fear. Did you feel less scared of it after it marked you? Yes. That's how they get you. You stop being scared of them, and they take root. You start testing your own limits, and start giving more. Before long, you've signed your name in blood, and they get your soul. So it told me. I sat back down silently and sent my knife away. What do I do with this skin? Burn it. No. Give it to me. I handed the skin to Luna, bloodying her hand. Then her palm flashed, white flame overcoming the patch and incinerating it, turning it to ash. Purification, not the kind that comes from magic. It's enough to prevent the influence over the flesh from pervading the household. But John, you'll still need to purify yourself. Do you realize that the thing you talked to should not have been able to take your fear? Yes. I nodded as she leaned forward. Do you? If you did, then that mark never would have appeared. It told you, right? That it can't take what you don't willingly give. Its words were true, and you willingly gave it your fear. If you understood what you should have done, none of this would have been an issue. Yeah, I know. You saying that only makes this situation worse. I know. I answered her simply, Luna huffing and leaning back. All right, tell me what the hell that thing was. You called it a node, but I refuse to believe it's like all the others. How does it work? I was silent for a bit, thinking about the beacons in Wonderland and continuance that I'd need to shut down. I already explained most of it. It's called a beacon. It encodes isekai and beams it into the atmosphere. It then gets redirected along an invisible boundary around the world using resonance, following the path it was encoded with before dropping down to its target. I started developing this tech around 8 months ago after I made contact with that boundary personally. You mean the waters? How did you make contact with it? It's miles up in the sky, and your planes don't have the ability to fly that high. Unless you lied about what they're capable of. I didn't lie. I just made better planes. Don't worry. I'm sure you'll find out about them eventually. We deployed them to the battlefield during the New Year's siege. You mean, you had the technology to touch upon the outer waters for 8 months, and only just started using that tech on the battlefield? If you've hidden it for that long, then how can we be certain that this is the first time you've been contacted by the lesser gods? Have you been communing with them all this time? She narrowed her eyes at me, my lingering fear washing away and her scrutiny starting to piss me off. I don't expect you to understand my development process, Luna, and I certainly hope you don't expect me to divulge important details about it. This is the first time I've been contacted like this, and although this situation didn't go as good as it could have, I don't enjoy you looking at me like I'm about to turn traitor to humanity. And I don't like the fact that you aren't as close with Christ as I once thought you were. I turned, Anderson speaking from behind us. He approached, looking at me with eerily neutral eyes. After he sat down by Luna, he leaned forward and stared at me. I'm frankly disappointed in this display, John. And I'm hardly trying to impress you. I didn't expect this outcome, but if I'm being honest, it has pointed me in the right direction. I'm the one developing the tech to turn this war around, not you guys, so forgive me if I don't give a damn about whether or not you approve of my methods. I didn't take anything from that thing, even though it got a bit of my fear. Sorry if I'm not familiar with such occurrences. I don't talk with whatever the fuck lesser gods are regularly, even though you two look at me like I do. I stared into Anderson's eyes, my fear finally disappearing. After some seconds of tense silence, Luna sighed. John, we're not accusing you of anything. But you have to understand how dangerous this situation is, and not just for you. You're right, you're the one developing all this technology, and if we're divulging some secrets, I think it's safe to tell you that your tech has single-handedly given all of the Holy Sea's peerages hope to reverse the dire situation on this continent, because they didn't have it before. Hell, it's the only thing that has enabled us to make a stand at the pillars of creation. We understand full well what you've contributed, but if someone like you were to turn on us after being tempted by otherworldly powers, the blow it would deliver to humanity would be more than devastating. And that's just as you are now, let alone when you've grown in power later. Do you understand how scared we are of that possibility? I remained silent, turning my gaze toward her. I could also understand their caution. I had the self-awareness to understand the damage I could do to humanity. Still, I didn't appreciate the lack of trust. It was like all the confidence they had in me evaporated. Anderson leaned back, speaking before I could respond. You spoke with a lesser god. They're more powerful than demons, and although they often have the same motivations, they aren't the same. They're smarter, and they don't operate by the same rules. That's why cults often pop up in their names. I didn't think there were any other gods. I thought there was only one true God. There is, but the word God can have multiple meanings. We've studied them extensively, but all you need to know is that they are powerful ancient entities that reside in the outer waters. They are very real. Christ does not deny their existence, and neither should we, because they pose very real threats to us despite being limited by God. Obviously, that cursed device is able to reach just far enough to allow them to tap into the stream, which one of them used to commune with you. Normally, only those with great spiritual attunement can open themselves enough to commune with one. But you just made that rare ability mechanical. It's the frequencies that it uses. The beacon is self-adjusting, and it's also designed to be controlled by psychic commands, which gives it great affinity for mental influence. I didn't realize that I had to be wary of extra-dimensional primordial beings when building it, so I gave this one the widest berth of capabilities. Thankfully, that doesn't apply to the others. Still, I'll shut them down until I can create better countermeasures. I don't need any of my scientists or engineers going haywire either. Good. Anderson nodded and retrieved a drink from his storage space, taking a swig. Luna spoke after him. This is the occult, John. You've gotten a glimpse of the true war, the spiritual war, and the enemies that are trying to break us in ways most people couldn't ever fathom. They aren't forces I thought you'd have to deal with yet, and I didn't want to say anything, because then your awareness would open the doorway to them. Their names carry power, after all. But I also hadn't known just how far you've taken your tech. Thankfully, Amara called us here quickly. Had you spoken to that thing longer, a mark would have been the least of your worries. I wouldn't have given in. I may not have been familiar with the experience, and I may have been unguarded with my fear, but that doesn't mean I would have made a deal with it. It doesn't take a deal to fall. It only takes enough corruption to pull you away from Christ. The only being you should ever fear is God. There is nothing else in this universe that you should ever fear more. Doing so is an insult to God, an admission that you believe something is above him. It is blasphemous. Keep that in mind from now on, because if you truly believe it, then nothing like this will ever happen again. Yeah, I will. I sighed, the tense atmosphere diffusing a bit. Luna continued, and get yourself purified. Do the things I know you haven't been doing. Build some chapels on your line. Ask for some priests to run them, and we'll send them. You need them, and your troops probably do too. There are historical examples of entire armies falling spiritually to the scourge. Don't become another example. Yeah, Vetsmon said something about spiritual battles too. I pondered, thinking back to old conversations and pieces of advice. After a bit more discussion, Luna and Anderson stood to leave. Be careful, John. We don't mean to be hostile toward you, but it caught us off guard, so we had no choice but to be intense with our approach. We need this lesson to stick with you. It has. I couldn't forget it if I wanted to. Take the day to calm yourself. Anderson has purified and blessed your bedroom, so you can go back to get sleep without worry of being disturbed. As for your device, well, I'll leave it to you. She left it at that, receiving a nod from me before we separated. Only when the two of them were in the air and away from my estate did I finally relax. Amara and I went back to the bedroom and sat on the bed, silent for a long while until she spoke. I'm sorry, John. I didn't realize you had been under attack like that. It's nothing for you to apologize about. You did the right thing. I needed help, because when I was in that space, I wasn't able to use my power at all. I looked down at my hands, feeling the psyche pumping through them like the power was brand new to my body. I had been way too vulnerable when talking to that entity, completely powerless, unable to muster anything to defend myself. My chest continued to sting as I calmed down, the searing pain of freshly exposed muscle and skin still prickling my brain. Amara shifted, urging me to sit against the headboard so she could start working on my wound. Her powers of healing flooded my body, bringing heat and stinging sensations of regrowth with it. Your power moved, actually. It was so violent that I felt it as soon as it started. The entire room had been flooded with psyche, so much that at some point, I couldn't actually see the world around us. My mind flooded with the images of your conversation with that thing in that void. I couldn't do anything to help. She sniffled, holding back tears as I took a look at her face. The swelling in her face was still fading, her eyes still red from whatever crying she had done before I woke. It seemed I had been in that state for a while, long enough for Amara to call Luna and Anderson and for them to arrive from wherever they came. A thin layer of new skin took form over my chest before the healing started slowing. Only when the last layer had finished growing did she stop, the skin still raw and tender. I retrieved some bandages, Amara helping me wrap my chest before I took out a cigar and started puffing the sweet smoke of recovery. I guess I flew too close to the sun this time. What do you mean? I took it too far, and I got burned. I had just never considered that something like this could happen. But that's not your fault. How could you have known? I'm not saying it was my fault, but that doesn't change what happened. Now that I know, I have to develop countermeasures. I've hit a hard wall for now, and it wasn't placed there by the limits of my intellect. It's comforting in a way that the only thing standing between me and what lies beyond the human realm is malevolent gods, not my capabilities. Gives me hope. Hope? For what? Amara looked at me, confused. I just smiled and looked her in those deep purple eyes. That someday, I'll be able to fucking annihilate them too. Chapter 307. Healing Unparalleled. March 20th, 629. Well, isn't that something? Amara muttered as she viewed the two screens in front of her. On them were two different views of the same thing. The disease of the Verx Marquiate had only spread more and gotten worse, despite the efforts of Iron Legion and quarantine measures. Amara figured it would happen, but she still couldn't help but remember how confident John was that it would. His confidence turned out to be correct. If the Scourge could plant it in one place, they could plant it anywhere, and clearly they were intent on using the Verx territory as a testing ground. They wouldn't possibly allow it to be quarantined. It confused Amara that the disease hadn't been found outside of the territory yet. She had thought they would spread the disease as much as possible, but it remained confined. John hadn't explained why since she hadn't asked, and if she was being honest, she didn't really care. Matters of the broad picture she left to John. Not only did she not have his ability to plan, manage, and scheme, but she didn't want to cluster her attention with matters that would hardly benefit from it. She wanted to focus on the things that would benefit them in the future, and she understood full well that her greatest strength, one of the few things she could best him at, was sheer power and authority. Part of bettering herself involved exactly what she was doing now. Spatial magic had been put on the back burner. She had gone through just about everything her family's grimoires could offer, and had developed enough magic using Xerian spells. While she couldn't say that she hit a plateau, the gains that could be acquired by looking into other fields of magic were greater, even if purely by virtue of versatility. She knew she'd have to do it in the future, and with their growing power level and increasingly dangerous encounters, she'd have to do it well. A warlock who could heal was a force multiplier, the most valuable member of any team. While Jaya and Ilinka had some degree of healing magic or alchemy, the need for an advanced healer on the Desert Eagles was becoming more apparent. John said that he had been keeping his eye out for potential recruits, but the pool of people who could match them was slim, not to mention if they were trustworthy. Not that Amara wanted him to find someone. She wanted to keep the Desert Eagle platoon small, and she wanted to know how to heal because she didn't want to have to trust another person to do it correctly. Learning healing magic herself would serve both ends. Not to mention that ever since she had developed her aura technique, healing magic had come painfully easy to her. Healing magic was all about knowing what was wrong and fixing those wrongs. Problem was, knowing what was wrong often took magical precision. It was easy to see that someone had their chest sliced open. It was not easy to see different layers of skin, the destroyed blood vessels and nerves, the damaged cells, the broken bones, the microfractures, the bruising, and more. The most advanced healing magic required more detail than most mages could ever garner. John had talked about understanding the finer things about the human body, like how it was made up of many trillions of cells, all of which with a myriad of functions, and all of the science that went into how they worked. He could only ever explain the more broad concepts, like how the body maintained a balance of acidity, how chemicals and minerals were distributed, how muscles actually moved, how nervous signals were sent, and how hormones affected growth and development. The human body was an incomprehensible mess of chemistry that not even John's world had fully understood despite entire industries being centered around it. Amara knew she couldn't hope to match that. However, she didn't need to know all those things to do something about it. All she had to do was be able to see the problem at hand, fix it, and enable the body to return itself to equilibrium. She had already learned the basics, and she was extremely good at it by now. The advanced spells had come just as easily as the basics, the difficulty only coming in learning the spell itself, not its execution. After that, all she had to do was ask Luna for some grimoires from the church. She had gotten her hands on those spells not long after their wedding. It had been Luna's gift. Now, after working on those spells and absorbing that knowledge for long enough, Amara finally decided to take her expertise to the field. She had left the estate a few days after John had his scare with that lesser god, leaving him be so he could lock himself in his workshop and work on the beacons. Apparently, as dangerous as it had been for him, it would be even more dangerous for her. He didn't want her anywhere near his systems until he could clean them out, so she decided to create a little distance for the time being. And then she chose to go to the second, most dangerous place she could be. The disease, dubbed the Violet Madness disease, could infect even her according to the past several months of study. Only the most powerful were capable of shrugging it off. The disease had incredible potency, and a lot of research had been conducted on it by Iron Legion. Amara had grabbed Jaya for her alchemy, and when the two of them arrived, they had been allowed access to an utterly massive archive of information. They were given a summoner assistant as well, one solely dedicated to the task of digging through the archive for information they needed because they couldn't. After getting settled in, Amara spent plenty of time putting her magic to the test. First, she studied how it reacted to different kinds of magic. She made great progress, and at this point in time, she had figured out how to kill it directly. The only downside was that only she could personally do so, and it wasn't easy work. She couldn't just fly around the infected villages and wipe out the disease in every person. She had to find a cure, a spell, or a substance that could eradicate the disease within the human body. What she was seeing now was a possible way to do that. In front of her was a screen created by psychic illusions, a standard terminal screen. It scanned the unconscious patient in front of her, bringing up a view of the disease acting within the bloodstream. The other screen was created by her own magic, giving her an actual direct view of the Violet Madness and its actions. It utilized a branch of light magic within the fire element, allowing her to literally shine light on the subject and view everything going on inside. What she saw, like the flowing cells and their shockingly fast actions and reactions, was determined by her level of precision with the spell. That meant she could see everything in perfect clarity. More than that, she could experiment on it, manipulate it. Being able to kill it came with the knowledge of how to affect it. Once she accomplished that initial milestone, progress skyrocketed. What did you find? Jaya asked from the side, a concoction steaming with reactions in front of her. Although not a master in her field, Jaya would be important in allowing them to create cures. She was more educated in what John called chemistry, which was basically the same as alchemy, despite how many times he had tried to convince her they weren't. This spell lets me hamper its rate of division. John was right in that it was a living organism, a bacteria. So although its vectors range from bloodborne to airborne, this form of life can indeed be tampered with by most types of healing magic. Now, if I can just tune this spell. Amara focused. The spell circles above the unconscious patient, slowly turning and adjusting. Some runes fell into place while others faded away, plucked out and rearranged by precise magical tendrils. Her aura flooded the patient and the spell, both of them reacting to her changes in different ways. Amara watched in real time as the violet madness was hampered. By using the frequencies of the disease's magical signature, she could affect it and only it. Then, all she had to do was resonate with those frequencies and change them with her own. The only tricky part was that this disease knew how to try and fight back. By utilizing the host's own magic, it was able to keep itself resilient. That meant the stronger the host was, the more difficult it was to prevent the spread. The person before Amara was ordinary, and so she had no trouble doing what she wanted. But the resistance could still be detected, which said enough about how potent the disease was. Across the span of about half an hour, Amara flooded the body in front of her with healing magic, resonating with the entire body and the violet madness within it. Then, with enough tuning, she saw the disease refuse to divide any longer. Each bacterial cell became inert, its functions halted. Amara couldn't find a single portion of the body where it continued to propagate, which meant her spell was a success. She smiled, tuned the spell a bit more, and then shut it down. Found it. Found what? The spell we need. I just halted the activity of the violet madness within this patient. That means we can allow the body to kill the disease itself. Its immune system will work with our help. Even conventional healing spells can aid that. Or concoctions. I've made a few potent ones that target the disease using the same principles your spells do. Sector 4 found some herbs that work well against the disease, so I've mixed those in with some water crystals. Amara nodded, logging down her spell formations. They could surely use some more work, but she planned on taking this success and beginning treatment on at least the ordinary. They were the majority of the carriers. After handing it off to her assistant, who would send it to Wonderland so they could start the enchanting process, she went back to her patient and recast the spells. The primary function of the spell she handed off was to slow and halt the rate of spread. However, the reverse could be done as well. With a quick test, Amara was able to multiply the spread of bacteria in her patient's body. It was only done for a few seconds and localized so as to not noticeably harm the patient, but it was enough for a test. A basic function of the spell, not one Amara was impressed with. She knew the real importance of the spell was in its resonance. Resonating with the disease meant much more than just allowing control over it. Resonation itself was a way to tap into the state of an object. A thing's frequency was a reflection of its state of being. Amara wanted to use that principle. The only reason she knew of the principle was because of John. He utilized resonance in most of his work. Resonance was the whole reason that Beacon was capable of allowing a lesser god to commune with him. The magnitude frequency was the basis of elemental crystal production. Resonating two crystals together allowed them to push and pull on each other, the foundation of the mana engine. Resonance was a way of the world. Frequencies were everywhere, in everything. It was in rocks, the ground, the air, light, sound, all forms of energy, and more. Naturally, living beings weren't exempt from this. In fact, frequencies had a far more profound effect on living beings than something as mere as a rock. Amara had only used frequencies in her combat magic, so they would become more potent. It helped her focus them, amplify their power. It was why she could punch so much harder than others of her level, and with a fraction of the energy input. But now, she was figuring out how to use them in her healing magic as well. Not just to amplify power, but to afford her healing the kind of capabilities only sovereigns were well known for. A major difficulty in healing considered the wall blocking the path to becoming a master healer was regenerating limbs. If an arm were gone, no amount of healing could bring it back. It would only seal the wound at the cut. That was because basic and advanced healing spells only aided the body's natural functions. Accelerated healing was only just that. It didn't afford the body new abilities, and in a way, didn't actually directly heal. The advanced spells were just better ways of accelerating the healing process and fixing the more minute wounds. Things like rearranging bones and sealing severed organs. They were better than basic spells, but couldn't be considered different. Just more refined. Now, Amara was seeing another path forward, one that she was sure nobody in the world's upper echelon would ever tell her. She could use frequencies and resonance to capture the normal state of the body, using the blueprints already dictated by a person's DNA. Then, by adjusting it, she could prevent the body from healing over a severed limb and instead force it to generate based on the template she fed it. Would it be the same exact as the original severed limb? Unlikely. She still wasn't a sovereign, and her spells could only be considered prototypical compared to theirs. But in her case, anything was magnitudes better than nothing. Having a weak arm was better than having no arm. Being able to regenerate limbs at all would open the doorway to so much more. Instead of merely aiding the body, she could supersede the body's own healing outright and generate the flesh and tissues. Without needing the guidance of the body's own functions, she could apply far more power than otherwise, removing that invisible limit on healing that plagued so many other healers. It would multiply the efficacy of her healing. On top of that, this disease, the violet madness, did things that most healing spells couldn't. John had told her that if she was going to study it, she needed to learn from the disease. She couldn't see it as evil. She had to see its utility, its abilities beyond the veil of infection and pestilence. The violet madness was capable of tapping into the power of the hosted infected, using their power for itself. It then transformed that power before using it to propagate. It was efficient and effective, far more than any healing spell Amara had ever heard of. It used hardly any energy, and more importantly, could empower even ordinary people, turning them from weaklings to slightly stronger weaklings when they were overcome by madness. It was similar to the Nephilim, except it didn't corrupt them. It only tampered with their hormones and poisoned their bodies. Amara intended to figure out how it did that. There was magic at play, being cast by the disease in ways she couldn't yet detect. It was obviously unconventional, and it was precisely that which she wanted to know. She wanted to harness this new way of healing, and she wanted to base her spells around it. She had already taken the first step when she learned to manipulate the bacteria, slowing down and accelerating its growth directly. She had figured out how to manipulate the functions of life using resonant frequencies. Now, she just needed to decompose the template that the bacteria's frequencies hid, learning how it worked on a deeper level. Once she did that, she'd take another major step toward the Great Barrier altogether. She could feel it. Her soul was telling her that this was the path forward. "Sorry, lady, just a little while longer," Amara muttered to the person underneath her spells. The patients had volunteered for experimentation in exchange for being taken care of nicely in Iron Legion facilities. But it had taken a great toll on them. Amara was careful and often brought no harm to her patients. Other warlocks were not as capable or precise as her. Still, she had already developed what could be considered a cure once Wonderland got the enchantments right. It wasn't great, but it was far more progress than they had garnered before she got there. She wasn't concerned about rushing the process. She wanted to learn. That by itself would bring all the results she wanted. Soon, not only would she be able to cure the violet madness, but the comprehensions she would gain from it would make her healing unparalleled behind the Great Barrier. Chapter 308, Weapon Safety. April 25th, 629. I'll head back to the estate tonight, spend a few days there with you to recover. My experiments are done, so I think it's about time I take the spells to the field. Once I'm done resting, I'll deploy to the hard point. Sounds good, love. See you soon. I gave my goodbye to Amara, her image on my aerial screen blowing a kiss at me before cutting out. With a smile, I looked back at the report I was sent. Amara had basically finished all the research she needed to do in the Verk's territory. The violet madness had found its cure by her hands. Wonderland had already fielded mass-producible enchanted medical pods that could halt the functions of the violet madness, the spells for which came from Amara. Then, They found alchemical concoctions that could attack the disease directly. Helped by recovery drugs that heightened the immune system, these new products would help wipe out the violet madness. The only downside was that they were incapable of helping those who had already been overcome by the disease. Some people, the worst of them, were so violently infected that killing the disease meant killing them. Amara had theories that their biological functions were already so warped that they were irreversible with current tech, or at least with any reasonable and accessible magic. Perhaps only a sovereign healer would be able to help them, and one that was willing to do so on a large scale didn't exist. That meant that around half of those who hadn't already died some time ago were a lost cause. We could only wait for them to die off, or put them down early, which Marquis Verks was trying to push for. He was just waiting on my approval, which I was about to send him. With some more quarantine and systematic deployment of the cure, we would be able to eradicate the disease with a bit of time. Even if it popped back up, quick action would simply kill it right back off. The boons Amara had gained from this venture were great. The efficacy of her healing magic had been launched forward multiple magnitudes, and she said that she had gotten even closer to the Great Barrier. Now she was getting ready to re-enter the battlefield so that she could put her new comprehensions to the test. With more study and experience, her next advancement and subsequent breach of the Great Barrier was guaranteed. I was quite proud of her work. Now, I just needed to get my own shit together. Putting the report away, I looked down at the broken beacon in my workshop. I still hadn't repaired it. Hell, I hadn't so much as touched any of the debris. Although the bedroom had been blessed in order to keep out supernatural influences, I still got visions whenever I entered the workshop. They had faded over time, but even now as I looked at the broken pieces of my magnificent machine, I could hear voices from around me, whispers coming from the dark corners of my workshop and beside my ear. It was difficult to ignore. Getting near the metal of the beacon infused flashes of the entity I had spoken to. I hadn't dared to even utter its name. Words carried power. Names did too. I wasn't interested in invoking them, so I opted to simply keep my mouth shut. Still, this was something I needed to tackle eventually. I wouldn't shy away from the risks of greatness. I had told Amara that I was working on these things while she was gone at the Verks territory, but I hadn't been working on this particular beacon. My primary concerns were with the psychic arrays that I had installed on and derived from it in my projects. I had been touching upon the firmament when I was developing my beacons. Now I knew it was real. Luna and Anderson simply called them the outer waters. Either way, there was a barrier out there on the spatial boundary of this planet, and beyond it were powerful entities that could be communed with. But therein lay the problem. It wasn't a problem that the firmament existed. No. The issue was with a single word that Luna and Anderson had spoken, commune. There were only two other contexts where that word was used. The first was in communion during Massachusetts. That I didn't care about. It was the second, commune, as in what a summoner did in order to summon spirits. I hadn't noticed the peculiarity at first, but there was little that I wasn't critical of. Luna and Anderson had said more than once that I communed with an entity. Sure, the occurrence could simply be coincidentally similar to the process that summoners use to call spirits. But Maxwell, the man who invented the call of the fallen angel, was unique in his verbiage. Call spirits, commune with spirits, marriage with spirits. These were unique terms in his call. Other calls didn't refer to the processes like that, primarily because they didn't exist in other calls. No other summoner could marry a spirit as I had with Totenstall. No other summoner could actively commune with a spirit. When I brought out a spirit, I actively fed its psycho. Other summoners had to pay a lump sum of psycho up front, and then their spirit came out for a limited duration before going back. Two different processes, two different terms. That made me wonder, if Maxwell was as intentional as I knew he was, as smart as I knew he was, as critical and as particular as I knew he was, then using that term was no mere coincidence. He used it because the process that he used to summon spirits in his call was similar in some capacity to communing with entities beyond the material world. Either that or vice versa. It meant the same regardless. Of course, that was just the talk of a conspiracy theorist. I had just about completely disregarded the train of thought as soon as I came up with it, at least until I looked into it just slightly deeper. It was as simple as taking another look at the formations used in Maxwell's call, from the advancement formations to the actual techniques used to do things like project into a dimension, to call, and to commune. And from them, I saw a few formations identical to what I had used in my beacon. Others were similar, but still different given the application. That sealed the deal for me. I could only come to one wild conclusion. The call of the fallen angel was either derived from or founded upon the ability to commune with the beings beyond the outer waters, the firmament. Reaching the firmament was one thing. But as soon as you did that, the formations and arrays within the call became eerily applicable in being able to speak with those entities. Looking back, it was no wonder I had such an easy time with the Beacon project. I had already learned some foundational principles. I had been taught from the very beginning how to commune with spirits in an active and deeper fashion than any other summoner. It was so deep that I had already allocated a portion of my soul to a spirit. And as it turns out, the only thing stopping me from doing the same thing with entities from the firmament was reaching toward the sky. I was powerful enough to do so personally, even without a beacon. I could establish an active connection with that outer barrier, beam psyche to it, creating an open link between the other side and my mind. That meant Maxwell had also been capable of it. Perhaps he had done so. I don't know why he would, but he had been high up in the church, familiar with the supernatural and spiritual conflict of the world. Luna and Anderson had said that it had been studied. I wouldn't be surprised if Maxwell had been a chief researcher, but that still begged the question, what the fuck had Maxwell been doing? And was it linked with his brand as a heretic? I was willing to bet that it was, but there were too many details missing and too many pieces that fogged up the picture. I couldn't be sure. I wasn't even sure how much I cared. What I did know, though, was that going and talking to the man was out of the question for now. Until I got things under control with my newfound spiritual awakening, I couldn't let him see me. He would notice, that much was a certainty. Then I wouldn't hear the end of it. Either way, given all of the information, it was no wonder the call of the fallen angel was so effective. After using the same sealing arrays that I had used on the neural gem, I shut down the residual influence lingering within the broken fragments of my beacon. I couldn't cleanse it yet, but I was sure that ability would come in time. For now, I just had to make sure neither Amara or I were being whispered at. I pushed the beacon to a corner of my workshop afterward. The sealing arrays were good for years, so I was just going to leave it be for now. I had already pushed multiple updates to the other beacons in operation. While Sector 4 had reported a few eldritch disturbances, they were all handled rather easily since those other beacons weren't as potent as mine had been. With my updates, they no longer allowed extraterrestrial influence, now able to be used on a wide scale. Their primary purpose was found in communication between the island of continuance and the mainland. However, they also provided channels for Iron Legion chatter, allowing things like planes more ways to communicate. Soon, we would need them by virtue of location, but that time was still a little ways away. It gave more options and solved a major problem on the back of my mind. I hadn't been solely focused on the beacons, though. Most of my attention had been on my advancement formations. I still worked on them daily, and the time for my advancement wasn't far off. I was hoping to take the step to Authority 9 by the end of the year. However, there was one project that I had revived, one I hadn't thought about for quite some time simply because I hadn't yet found a lead that told me where to start. The act of passing off summons to other people. I hadn't found any information on it from my surveillance over the church or the kingdom. It was pretty safe to say that nobody had ever managed to work out how to do so. I had a few pieces, though, ones that made it especially suitable for me to be the first. Initially, I figured my call would make it easier. The active communion with my spirits made them a bit more dynamic. Then, just recently, I figured that I could use my newfound knowledge of the esoteric to help with communion over a distance. It's exactly what allowed a lesser god to talk with me in the first place. If I combined it with my power to infiltrate minds, as I had learned to do over at the Island of Continuance, and by studying the neural gem, I could try to mimic the power of a summoner in the mind of another person. Or, at least commune with the mind of another person. If I did all that, I could create a dimensional link with another person's mind, a link that allowed a spirit from my dimension to drop into another person's hands without actually removing the spirit from me. An issue all summoners faced was that their spirits couldn't leave them, even in the case of hot summons. It was only the form that manifested, and the spirit always resided in the dimension. But with the link, it could go to another person and manifest for them instead of me. It would still be fed and controlled by me, but it could at least be wielded by someone else. I had experimented extensively with these theories, using Phaidon as a guinea pig to see if it would work. It didn't work. Not a single time. Until I implemented my mind palace, that was. I only found out recently that the mind palace was not just helpful in this process, but critical. If I was correct, the entire ability of passing off summons to someone else hinged on the mind palace. The reason for that was actually a phenomenon that occurred when a spirit was summoned. No summoner ever noticed it because they never had to stress the ability, but when a spirit manifested, there was a mental load placed on the summoner for the duration of the summon. Hot summoners felt this the most since they had to actively control their summons while they were out. They couldn't bring out so many, otherwise they'd overwhelm themselves, not to mention the burden of paying the upfront psychic costs of summoning. That issue was solved with Maxwell's call, but I wasn't a hot summoner. Even I hadn't really noticed it, or cared. The most amount of summons I had out at a time was no greater than 5 or 6, if that. Most often, it was just a rifle, armor, and maybe a pistol or some piece of auxiliary gear. I never felt the mental load, but it was there, and it was important. In my mind, whenever a spirit was summoned, it was brought down into my mind first. Even before I had the mind palace, such was the process. It was just that, with the superiority of Maxwell's call and my mind palace being the first of its kind, I hadn't noticed such a small detail. But I was critical of everything, even that. So I made the hypothesis and got to testing. With my mind palace, I could perfectly reconstruct the details of the spirit that I summoned, even without perfect memory. However, others could not do the same. I figured that was exactly why they couldn't hold on to a summon. They weren't given the direct mental load a spirit placed on the summoner. They couldn't construct or comprehend the spirit, and therefore couldn't sustain it. It wasn't just a matter of providing the psyche. It was a matter of mental visualization. A summoner had to carry that burden for whoever they wanted to hand a summon off to. Apparently, it was impossible to do without a mind palace. Why? Likely because my mind palace codified everything in my mental headspace. Even if a summoner knew everything about a spirit and could perfectly visualize it, that didn't mean another person could make sense of his jumbled mess of an abstract mind. He couldn't hand off his own understanding. But a mind palace solved that issue by codifying the mind, making it more objective, not subjective. It had already been proven that other people could comprehend my mind palace. Several people had seen it personally. On the other hand, I've never heard of a summoner bringing people into his mind before. It was a unique occurrence, unique to me, all thanks to my mind palace. So it all came down to communion, active summoning, and the mind palace. I worked on the formations and arrays, turned the ability to tamper and latch onto the mind into a proper psychic spell instead of just my own manipulation. Then I pulled on the formations for communion, improved upon them, and assembled them into something specially designed for the projection of exact information. Not just for words or images, but for dimensions and spirits. In a way, it was all simply about communication. An extremely advanced and borderline occult form of communication. And then I waited, Amara arriving home from the Verk's territory. John. She walked into my workshop, glancing at the piles of ghostly scrap in the corner before walking over to me. I turned to her, staring at her. My fingers still flickered with runes and arrays, but I decided to simply settle on one and try it. I need your help with something, dear. With what? Are you all right? I'm very all right. Put up your palm. She did as I said, her hand raising so her palm was facing toward the ceiling. I walked to her, putting mine on top of hers before letting out a long breath. Now, I'm going to touch your mind. It's not going to be like telepathy, not even like when you were brought into my mind palace. It's going to be different. I'm going to be reaching into yours a bit. Okay, I haven't figured out how to make it less invasive yet, but either way, this might just be the first step to a class revolution. Well, I trust you. I smiled at her, and then psychic arrays bloomed around our hands. I reached out toward her mind, establishing the connection. For a brief moment, I saw her mental state, saw her recent memories and the jumbled structure of her thoughts. It was all confusing, no rhyme or reason to it. Then I called down a spirit, pushing its codified form into her sea of thoughts and images. It settled nicely under my influence, maintaining a direct connection with me, as if it had never left at all. I gave it Psyche, and then it manifested. We both looked down, a pistol appearing between our hands. I shifted it around, allowing Amara to grab it properly. A standard 1911 pistol chambered in 45 ACP, it barely fit into her grip, her fingers unable to completely clasp around. Then, I slowly lifted my hand. Amara's eyes bulged, looking between me and the pistol as I stepped away. She remained rooted, unwilling to even twitch her hand around the weapon. John, did you just? I've finally done it. I could sense the active connection between the spirit and her mind. I was right. All I had to do was accommodate the mental load for the other person. It took two techniques completely foreign to this world. One that I had invented, and the other derived from the occult and study of the firmament. Then, it was topped off with a summoner call that had only been passed down to a single person, myself. I smiled at Amara, slumping down into my chair as she gained the courage to turn the pistol over in her hand, inspecting it. Here, a magazine. One bullet. I sent the spirit into her mind, a magazine soon appearing in her other hand, with one bullet inside. I chuckled at her as she looked at it like a new toy. Go ahead. You've seen me do it a million times before. She smiled at me, slowly inserting the magazine before tapping it, making sure it was locked. Now rack the slide. She did as I said, her vigor from temperings making the task easy. The bullet was in the chamber. Now, point it at the wall and pull the trigger. You really want me to shoot inside your workshop? This is a historical moment for the entire summoner class, dear. I couldn't care less if you blow a hole through it, let alone scuff the finish. I waved toward her, her smile widening as she hoisted the pistol, mimicking my stance. I guided her into the proper position, helping her aim. Then I took a step back and waited, her fingers slowly pulling until the pistol snapped off with a bang. She jerked, the recoil kicking her like she wasn't several times stronger than the average man on Earth. The bullet flattened on the wall, which was reinforced up the ass. Holy, that was awesome. Right. You can really hand off summons. I can use your guns. Damn right, baby. This stays between us for now, though. No shit. She rolled her eyes at me, and then, the pistol suddenly disappeared from her hands. Where'd it go? I took it back. Seems like it's fully within my control to give and take. I just need to work on arrays that actually hand off the spirits. It's invasive, as I'm sure you felt. Yes, I saw the memories you peeked at. Doesn't feel great, having your mind and thoughts directly looked at. Still better than your fingers around my brain, though. I smirked at her reference to our time at continuance. I still apologized to Arya for that one, occasionally. She had gotten the worst of it, and she was not the only one. Wait, how did you do it? What changed that you suddenly gained this ability? Amara asked curiously, prompting me to wave toward the beacon. I just used my newfound knowledge, the last piece. That, my mind palace, and Maxwell's call are the requirements to use this. At least for now. I imagine I can remove the necessity for Maxwell's call, but the formations I use to commune with your mind and my mind palace are absolutely necessary. You mean, 3 things that only you have access to? Indeed. I'm calling it bestowal. I'll think about how to handle this ability and when to reveal it. Well, the second you do, the world will go insane. The entire summoner class will undergo an upheaval. Yup, it'll make all summoners massively more valuable, which honestly, I can't have right now. The timing will have to be divine. So for now, I'll have to settle for simply giving you some fancy new gear. Well, if I wear your gear, then I can't wear the witch hat. She smiled, making me stare at her for a few seconds in thought. Never mind then. Oh, come on. I was just kidding. Hey, let's go outside and do some shooting. I want to try the big guns. No shooting until I teach you about weapon safety. There are 5 rules of weapon safety. The first rule is to treat every firearm as if it is loaded. The second rule. Ugh. Chapter 309. No going back. April 26th, 629. After spending the day doing some shooting with Amara and testing out the extent of my new ability, I decided to make a call and inquire. There was a reason I believed that I had just revolutionized the summoner class in a way never done before, despite the ability technically not being new. Some time ago, when I was still a fledgling at the Magisterium, I had met Vetsman's mother, Willow. She had told me then that the ability to hand off summons was a thing, implying that she had used it in the military herself since she was a cold summoner. It was clearly secret knowledge, which was fine and well. However, an ability like that should be widespread by now. She wasn't the one who invented the ability, that much I was certain of, so it had been around for some time. I made the call, and Willow picked up quickly. John, this is an unexpected surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure? Hello, madam. I was calling to ask you some quick questions. They might be slightly sensitive, but we've spoken about it before. Of course, I'll answer it within my ability to. The ability to hand off your summons to someone else. You've spoken about it before some time ago. I was wondering about the limitations of the ability. I figured it would be widespread by now if it was truly that good. There was a moment of silence before she responded. I suppose you're no longer the young man at the magisterium. Very well. The ability is primarily used by a select few summoners within the order where I used to work. Back then, I was the weapons backup for a Tier 3 squad of knights, a more experimental unit than anything else. Unfortunately, our trial runs weren't long-lasted. The ability to pass off a summon demands incredible concentration and telepathic connection with another person. A summoner must dedicate their mind toward that mental connection, keeping in their mind the image of the summon they want to hand off. Then, the other person must make sense of the images. Only after extensive training between the pair can the summon be handed off. It's tedious, and more often than not, pairs simply aren't able to make sense of each other and the connection fails. Not to mention that even I, one of the best to go through the program, was only able to pass off one summon to one person at a time. I could never do multiple simultaneously, even with a spark, and I was only able to make the exchange with 3 different people. The ability is extremely limited and difficult to implement in the heat of a battle. The moment concentration is broken, the summon is rescinded. I see. I asked her a few more questions, and the answers came back about as I expected. The church had indeed developed the ability, and extensive study had been done on it. However, that was where its use stopped. The ability couldn't feasibly be used in battle. It wasn't worth the time or effort, not to mention the risk. The Order's Tier 1 teams would never bring a summoner into the battles they engaged in. Not to mention that even if those problems were solved, if a summoner could only hand off a single weapon, that would necessitate 1 summoner per night, which would increase the population of any military unit by around 50%. That was a lot of unnecessary manpower for a function that could be replaced by simply manufacturing a sword or spear. By every metric, their ability wasn't useful, and after a few more questions, I found out that the program Willow had participated in was just about phased out. They still studied the ability and tried to improve it, but it was clear to the upper echelons that it wasn't worth the cost. I decided to end the call after getting the information I needed. Thank you, madam. I appreciate the information. Of course. Was there any particular reason you wanted to know about it? I simply happened to be doing research on it myself. Oh my, have you made any progress? I suppose you could call it progress. I've got some more work to do, but the project is not without its fruits. Either way, your assistance will help me. I'm glad I could help. Take care of yourself, John. The call ended, and I pondered. The ability I had developed, bestowal, was the ideal form of what the church had been shooting for. Their ability wouldn't revolutionize the summoner class, mine would. That wasn't mentioning the benefits that my Mind Palace and Maxwell's Call would bring by themselves. Summoners had incredible potential to unearth. I was living proof of what they could achieve, and in the future, I would be the pioneer of the true summoner path. Maybe not the most perfect, but damn close. So it was safe to say that I still had things in my hands. The church would be no threat to my designs for the class as a whole. Once I developed some concrete formations and arrays, both for the technique as well as for the Mind Palace technique, I'd be capable of releasing this ability to the wider summoner population. From there, the class would undergo an upheaval. Until then, I could hand things off to Sector 4, have them run tests and play with the ability in the field. With that knowledge in hand, I hid away in my study with Amara, doing more tests and refining what was in hand. A few weeks passed. After Amara left to re-enter the battlefield with her new spell work, I continued to receive updates on everything going on in the kingdom. The war was just one of the things I monitored, eyes being kept on the state of the blizzard to track the activity of the sovereign at all times. While that went on, Sector 4 was busy fighting a 3-front war in the shadows. They were planting teleportation devices in all the Dragon Corpse vaults, hunting down Nephilim cells in cities and villages, and running propaganda campaigns around the clock. All of that was on top of their standard duties, such as counter-espionage and special combat missions. There was no rest for my Pale Horsemen and extremely little room for error. Sector 4 had expanded accordingly, of course. Over time, we continued to find suitable candidates for the job, people who had been evaluated over time and found trustworthy. They believed in the cause, were radical enough in their drive and discipline to handle the jobs they carried out with excellence. And so they were inducted into the faceless ranks. Almost all of them passed our tests and entered a unit with flying colors. The Scourge had previously been an object of horror and despair. However, against my anvil of war, they had been turned into a hammer to temper my troops. When people were shown that they could win, they'd turn desperate to do just that. Many of my ordinary troops were showing that insatiable drive to slaughter our enemies, to relish in the achievement of not just battling the Scourge and surviving, but destroying them en masse. This all meant that Sector 4 had a couple thousand operatives now. Many of them were in the more logistical areas like counter-espionage and special combat, their most important jobs. But plenty had been recruited into the darker units, those who employed special tactics to infiltrate the vaults, carry out raids, and sabotage our enemies. They were the premier, the highest examples of skill, and there were only a couple hundred of them. Sector 4 was my left hand, loyal and hidden. I was proud of the organization I had raised, but their job was far from finished. Iron Legion's war, Sector 4's operations, Wonderland's research, and my own personal projects all seemed to be coming to a head. I was making breakneck progress with my advancement formations, soon to reach Authority 9, and Wonderland was perfecting key technologies. That wasn't mentioning the branch on the island of Continuance. Having been cut off from most of the news from the outside world besides Iron Legion's fantastic battle records, they continued to buckle down and study the anomaly week after week, month after month. It had been some time, and they had come out with key theories and research. I had monitored it, but hadn't implemented much of it since I was so busy with other things. My time to focus on it would come, though. I already knew when it would. They were also the people responsible for building my new plane. The idea that I had shown Amara some time ago wasn't a joke. I was building a kind of megastructural airship, and the construction had already been started on the island. It had been months since they were put to the task, cargo planes constantly ferrying new materials and parts there. It would be ready before long. I looked forward to the day that my glorious creation finally made its debut. My days of keeping track of everything and pushing progress forward were constant. I hardly ever slept now. I only had to sleep once a week at minimum so long as I didn't engage in combat, 2 weeks if I wanted to push it a bit. That meant I was sleeping on average of 3 times a month, which meant that I was gaining all those hours to put toward my projects. I went through a great many cigars, ending up buying more stock from the Tavera family with more powerful potencies. At this point, my cigars were enough to give a jolt to Authority 5 and 6 nights. It was a good thing I was filthy rich. Unfortunately, the time for my days to grow longer ended up coming just as I expected it to. May 18th, 629. An alarm on my aerial blared, my hands coming to a halt over my desk. I glanced at the screen, which showed an urgent call coming from my general on the line. I picked up. General Gaffney. Everything okay? That might require your input to answer, sir. We've picked up movement from the Sovereign. How exciting. I'm on my way. I hang up, tasking Erhen with spinning up 2 jets. Soon I was in the air, my jet taking me toward the line, the other heading toward my solution to the Sovereign problem. I was in the command hardpoint before long, General Gaffney meeting me. Sir. General. I can already feel it. Is the data in alignment? It's right here. He waved to the table, covered in a map, indicators, and statistics. The numbers and scans showed that the Sovereign had started amping up the intensity of the blizzard. The projectors and shields on the line that pushed the blizzard back were already straining to keep up with it, blowing through crystals like candy. Consumption had jumped by around 80% in the past few hours, and it was still climbing. I could feel the intention of the Sovereign aimed toward the hardpoint. Surrounding scans showed that mass Scourge concentrations were all primed to fall onto the line. According to estimates of mobile armies as well as what was coming through the intestine, they were numbering around 1.8 million and ready to siege. It would clearly happen soon, and this time, the Sovereign would join his armies. It had been 5 months, which was a bit shorter than I wanted, but not out of expectations or preparations. I stared, taking everything in, constructing an image of the situation in my mind. Then I smiled, patting the general on the shoulder. Congratulations, General. We've finally made it. The big day is here. You mean, the day for you to bring out the solution to the Sovereign? Indeed. He'll be on his way soon. In the meantime, You need to start preparing. You know what kind of stress the line is about to come under, so get our troops ready. Yes, sir. This line will hold. After that, it's the beginning of the end. The general started moving and giving commands, and I left the room, moving to the top of the wall where I found myself standing on the hardpoint. I gazed out at the battlefield. Thousands of monsters were charging the wall from the blizzard, being cut down by incessant turret fire. It was only fodder today, being nothing but routine for the troops behind the turrets. Only a few turrets were active, and more were coming offline as the general sent them to rest. At the same time, stockpiles of recovery drugs were being imported and cracked open to be prepared. The wedded city, with its new farming equipment from Son Industries, was producing medicinal herbs without end. I had already bought a supply of them for this very purpose, and now they were getting ready to be put to use. Soon, there would be very little rest to be had. I needed my troops to have every edge. Up above my head, planes were pulling back as their aerial enemies retreated. There were no jets out at the moment, but they'd be ready to scramble at a moment's notice. Pilots were required to live near the runways so they could deploy on demand. I could feel the currents of the battlefield. They were receding, like the pull of the tides before a tsunami. For now the field was clearing. Some of my troops might be relieved for a short moment. There was no more applicable phrase than the calm before the storm. It felt like I could hear the screams and cries of those 2 million monsters, all of them writhing with the knowledge that they'd soon be sieging this place for the last time. They would assume correctly. This would be the last time that the line was sieged. Once it was over, the line will have served its primary purpose. For a handful of hours, I simply stared out at the battlefield, feeling the collective aura of an army numbering 1.8 million and counting. While we had faced off against hundreds of thousands, even a million before, it had never been all at once. This time, they'd be coming as one unit, spread across the line and demanding everything we had to offer. It would be possible, but only after that sovereign was killed. Soon, I heard a helicopter make its approach. It landed on top of the hardpoint beside me. When the hatch opened, I turned. Out stepped my solution. Sir Cooper, it's been some time. That it has. I thank you again for taking on this challenge. On the contrary, I thank you for finding me a suitable chance. This needed to happen eventually, and now happens to be a perfect time. We shook hands, my gaze turning upward at one of the few men I knew who was taller than me. The Raven Chief, Ironheart, had an unintentionally menacing grin on his face. Our coats fluttered as the rotors of the helicopter spun down. I asked the one question on my mind. Won't the sovereign over there know you're here? I thought sovereigns could see each other. Whether or not they do wholly depends on each sovereign. As for me, no, nothing can see me. Don't you remember my aura? Yes, how could I forget? I chuckled, getting a hint of his aura even now. It was mostly hidden, but a deeper look revealed nothing but an abyss that ate all that gazed upon it. I pulled away before my thoughts could be consumed. If he had that kind of aura, then I believed him when he said nobody could see him. I guess that's how you managed to hide your authority for so long. Indeed, I've been waiting many decades for this moment. I just didn't think that it would rely on a boy I only met a handful of years ago. You've changed the world, John Cooper. Are you sure you don't want to be king? Very sure. I'll leave that job to you. Now what's the plan? We wait. I brought up my aerial, looking at the stats once more. The sovereign was getting closer. The armies would close in on us within the day. They were moving fast. You only need to wait one more day. Once they start attacking in full force, you'll get your battle. Can your troops and wall hold until then? The sovereign is putting vast pressure on you. I've been preparing for this day for years. It'll hold. Long enough at least, but that's all we need. I turned my gaze back out toward the battlefield, feeling the collective aura of those monstrous armies drawing near. We'll let them get in close. Use our advantage for as much as it's worth. Because once we start, there's no going back. Chapter 310, Blinded Yourself. April 27th, 629. I let out a long breath within the command center. My eyes closed as the tides shifted. My brows raised, my mind filled with the auric world around me. The scourge, their intent, their hostility, their raving madness and demonic eagerness. I could feel it all crash against the line, bearing down on every soldier. I could feel the dormant confidence of my soldiers, their lack of fear and abundance of trust in each other. They were a cohesive whole. Can you feel it, General? What, sir? The ebb and flow of the world. The cries of the scourge, the silent intent of our troops, the clash of their dichotomy. I can hear the symphony of their collectives. Can you hear it? The rising intensity of our resonance. I'm afraid I don't follow, sir. General Gaffney looked at me weirdly, a sigh escaping my lips. That means you need to sound the alarm, General. Muster the soldiers. The enemy is about to move. Yes, sir. He was placid as he punched in a few commands. Soon after, an alarm rang through the entire line. My troops stirred, the intensity rising with the introduction of violins and trumpets. I could feel the scourge respond in its faint way, cymbals and rattlers echoing from dark corners. They manned their stations, their anxiety rising. Turrets oriented at the blizzard. Not a single monster was in front of the line. The enemy was hidden, incoming, but waiting. Alarms wailed simultaneously in rear bases miles away. From behind the line, there were tubas and flutes that sang with promises of support. From the runways scrambled jets and planes stocked full with ordnance that rumbled like gongs. The shields, now pushing 200% load despite being pulled in and sparking with broken runes of mana, creaked like an unsteady wooden bridge unable to hold the weight of the conflict above it. The collection of sounds and visuals flickered through my mind, including the ones still silent. I could feel their presence, their unsung potential, waiting for their opportunity. It would come soon. Soon, one of the sensors started blaring. Seismic charts started fluctuating, and underground detectors threw alerts of monster approach. The ground was showing a seismic magnitude equivalent to a 3.0 earthquake. It was more heard than felt, but more concerning was what happened next. Mines started blowing, underground charges throwing dirt into the air as they were tripped. The explosions started within the blizzard, each one sending an alert when it blew. But soon they got closer, within half a mile, and continuing forward. Underground scans soon came up, and we saw what was coming from underneath. Massive worms chewed through the ground, sliding forward through the mines, but not unimpeded. They slowed down as they got closer, and the mines got denser. Each one blew a hole in whatever monster was underneath, but they continued anyway. Soon, not even a quarter mile away from the wall, they stopped. Then the ground exploded open, massive tunnels 300 feet in diameter being exposed on the surface. And out they charged. Thousands of monsters raved through the holes, of which there were dozens across several miles through no man's land. The turrets opened fire only seconds after the first monsters came through, all of them focusing fire on those openings. Thousands of monsters tried to flood through, all of them denied. Their corpses were soon used to plug the holes, but more pushed through with sheer strength, blowing corpses aside. Then the larger, more armored enemies came. They tanked shots and charged forward, trying to create a path. While they managed to survive just a few dozen more feet, other turrets never stopped firing at the exits themselves. Their efforts were denied, but they weren't alone. The seismic activity continued to rise, and before long, the source exposed itself. Those massive, armored behemoths blew through the blizzard, marching straight toward the walls. Alarms blared as signals were sent to deployable units. Brigadiers being tasked with leaving the safety of the wall to engage personally and bring down those behemoths. With them was the main army. Tens of thousands across miles flooded forward as if they were an unstoppable tide. They likened themselves to a tsunami. They were a mass of bone and flesh, their combat power worth nothing, their durability the only thing that brought value to the ones behind them. They weren't meant to reach the walls. They were meant to die to our furious response so that others may attempt to even scratch the surface of the line. Heavy cannons aimed and fired. Artillery started coming down from the skies, and planes swooped in to drop their payloads. Jets screamed from above as aerial enemies appeared like locusts from the blizzard, flooding toward the top of the wall where anti-air opened up with impunity. It was early in the morning, the sun barely beginning to rise, and explosions were the symphony that graced the start of this wonderful day. They lit up the atmosphere and cratered the ground amidst corpses. The collective aura of the scourge bore down on the line, and this time, the intelligence behind it was fatally serious. Unlike the army that overran Stronghold Charlie, unable to be contested, this army, double the size and containing much greater concentrations of strength, knew that it would have to sacrifice if it wanted even the mere chance to bring down this line. I felt chills down my spine, a mysterious sense of déjà vu flooding my mind as if it were a divine message. I could see what was happening, could see every moving part as if I were the cogs of the machine. I felt omniscient, my ears filled with the orchestra of wrath and righteous fury, my eyes covered by the light of fire and purification, my tongue blessed with the taste of blistering smoke and poisonous blood, my skin caressed with the touch of bone spurs and soft metal. When I regained myself, I was atop the hardpoint, staring out at the battlefield, at the blizzard, at the skies above. I was looking beyond it all, gazing at that golden barrier in the distance, watching it approach me like the sovereign within the blizzard. My lungs took in the breath of the exhilaration and adrenaline that my soldiers let out with every scream and roar, and I exhaled the satisfaction of clairvoyance. "It's glorious. Chief Ironheart, it's time. You're the conductor," he muttered from behind me, my eyes tearing away from the great barrier. He smiled at me, the two of us staring at each other. I felt like I could see through him. That was my own naivety and delusion. That feeling, Sir Cooper, what you just bathed in, that magnificent satisfaction and brain-tingling sensation of absolution. That's what I'm about to acquire for myself. I trained for decades to become a sovereign. I waited for nearly as long for this moment. The moment that I would acquire my first kill as a being on the horizon. The moment that I would kill another sovereign and would officially earn my title as a true sovereign. Today, the world will know my name, as it will know your success against the largest army the kingdom has ever been faced with. I listened to him and nodded. Then I stepped to the side, waving toward the blizzard. They've delivered themselves. You can go hunt. I will take care of the rest. Indeed you will. Chief Ironheart Raven stepped forward toward the edge. In his hands appeared two long swords, both of them bulkier than any sword I had ever seen before, with enough weight that I could feel their displacement by the way they shifted the atmosphere. He stepped to the edge and then launched himself into the blizzard with a jump that dented the entire hardpoint. I waited, watching the blizzard, the armies below leaving my focus as I felt the void that was Ironheart's aura grow. It threatened to consume my thoughts, threatened to turn my consciousness to nothing, overriding my understanding of life and being. Yet I maintained my focus on it anyway. It wasn't long before I felt the first clash. Then I saw it, a sword strike that split the blizzard in two. Ironheart was exposed. Before him the other sovereign, a royal with so many layers of runes between him and Ironheart that I could barely make out its figure. The first strike passed in an instant. I wouldn't have been able to see Ironheart move if I hadn't dilated my perception of time. My sparks ran into overdrive, catching every little movement, every adjustment of vigor and mana. I watched, and I intended to learn. Ironheart drove his swords down, shattering the barrier of runes and magic. His vigor launched forward, taking the form of the void, consuming all that got in its way. But it was overwhelmed. The royal launched thousands of poisonous bolts of magic at the blades. The void had its fill, and they were dispersed. Ironheart continued in his unrelenting attacks. Slice after slice, he engaged his technique and closed the distance. To the royal, unleashing so much vigor that my eyes burned with the sight of it. All of it was focused solely on the royal, not a single sliver of vigor going to waste. It was scarily efficient. Sovereigns were known for their sheer, world-rending power. The power contained within a single slice of the King of Anarchy's blade was enough to create a literal tsunami of earth from miles away. It was power previously incomprehensible to my mind. I couldn't even gaze upon Anarchy at that time without soon turning to Amara and attempting to kill her, as if it was a mercy. It was power that placed a being in the realm of gods. Normally, people would equate that with larger scales. This royal was the perfect example. A blizzard miles around, a literal walking natural disaster. But with Ironheart, the case was different. It was the opposite. All of his power, all of that world-shattering might, was concentrated into two blades. It didn't expand and exert itself. It contracted and consumed. That void within him got stronger. It ate my very vision, devoured my hearing, eliminated my taste. At some point, I started seeing in monochrome, my retinas blotting like they would if I stared into the sun. But I continued watching. I didn't look away. I could feel my awareness expanding as a consequence. Ironheart swung his blades, one after the other, chaining into perfect form and technique. There wasn't a moment of rest for the royal. So much mana was pouring off of it and into the surroundings that the blizzard, after a mere minute, was retracted. The shields nearly exploded as they pushed outward with the relief and pressure, blasting away the snow and revealing the armies for a dozen miles back. It revealed the millions monsters that were marching toward us. They were a literal sea, their armies extending beyond our sight. I quickly got audible alerts. The counts and estimations updated in real time, sensors nearly exploding as the signatures were measured, no longer hampered by the blizzard. What we initially thought was 1.8 million monsters was turning out to be over 4 million. I smiled, and then started cackling, my laughs drowned out by the explosions amping up another magnitude. My soldiers started delivering their justice by the power of insanity. No longer was this a rational battle of efficiency and distribution. It was now a furious fight to see who could light themselves aflame faster and cast their power into the monsters before them. At this moment, though, I cared not. I had made my preparations, I had trained my generals, I had supplied them with enough firepower to evaporate a sea, and I had terraformed the world to mount their defense. They would not fail, even against double or triple the foes. I had surpassed numbers and fodder. By the might of my technology, I had turned the scourge into a mere statistic and calculated my victory. Ironheart flashed across the land. Each step took him whatever distance he needed it to, as if distance was no longer a concept that had any meaning. The royal moved with tangible amounts of mana that obscured my senses with its mere existence. It was not just fluid, but solid, like a real object. And through its manipulation, the royal was able to manifest certain properties in that mana that blocked and evaporated Ironheart's attacks. Their power was virtually endless, and it was not without its effects on the surroundings. Their battle plowed through no man's land. Lingering energy shot across the ground and gouged trenches in the planet. Some were sent toward the wall. Thankfully, nothing more than collateral, and yet it still dented what had effectively become a cliff made of metal. Not even a few dozen feet of material reinforced with layers and saturations of earth mana was able to resist the might of collateral damage from sovereigns. They flickered across the land, and my eyes followed from my vantage point. Ironheart's swords were conduits for his released power, which took on both tangible and conceptual form. He had surpassed the bounds of what knights knew as coalescence, a step above mere emission. His vigor took on both external form as well as specialized properties. Though after becoming a sovereign, nay, after breaching the Great Barrier, those properties had gained the conceptual. That was the void of his aura. It wasn't mere consumption. It was nullification. It turned something into nothing, canceling it out and removing it from reality. It turned his power into a negative in a universe where existence was a positive. His power was immutable. That much I was able to surmise. But of course, the true secrets of such power were unknowable to me. It was still a realm I couldn't touch on. Yet, the battle didn't end quickly. On the contrary, I stared and barely blinked at all for over an hour. I stared so intently that I was just about blind after that hour had passed. I could barely see the explosions happening across the battlefield. The fiery rage was unseen, and yet I continued to look because I had ceased to see through the lens of light. It was the conceptual that was blinding me, and yet it only opened the eyes of my mind to its influence. I saw the battle between Ironheart and the Royal not in terms of movements and strikes, but in terms of power and effect. I didn't see Ironheart's void eat the magic of the Royal. I saw an exchange of forces between reality and nothing. It exploded in my mind with blinding flashes of magical data. There was always information to be found, no matter the form it took. I saw the Royal learn through time how poorly it could handle Ironheart's void. The Royal utilized the forces of nature like a proper warlock, its elements tainted with monstrous power. Its power was erratic, unfocused, clearly meant for large-scale battles. The Royal was at a disadvantage when facing someone like Ironheart. But that's all it was, a mere disadvantage. The spells that Royal cast still ripped apart the world in an attempt to take Ironheart with them. Spatial magic had evacuated all air from the surroundings, the two of them fighting in a vacuum. Ironheart was faced with constant pressure and attacks from all sides. The Royal had him in a domain that extended for miles, going wherever the Royal went, Ironheart unable to escape it. He wasn't able to avoid most of the attacks. They all slammed into his armor of vigor and void, shattering against his defenses like glass. But there were always more. 1,000 more every minute. The display of magical prowess was harrowing. Its capabilities had already been far greater than any natural disaster. Month after month, that sovereign had battered the line with its blizzard, warping the very climate, miles of power and magic exerting force all hours of every day. It was nothing more than passive magic. What the Royals showed now was power capable of ripping apart the line without resistance. The world bent to its power, all of it focused solely on Ironheart. Their clashes ruined the landscape, sliced the line, created new landmarks, eradicated hills, and carved ravines. Albeit not overly significant, by mere collateral the two of them slaughtered several 100,000 monsters in the surroundings. They also killed dozens of my soldiers with the damage to the line. None of my turrets were installed close to each other, but their devastation was just too great. The first deaths of Iron Legion since the line was established occurred at their hands. Already within expectations, yet no easier to see. Hour after hour I continued to watch, and they continued to battle. The Royals' disadvantage grew with every minute. Ironheart placed so much concentrated pressure on it that from the beginning, even I knew the gap couldn't be overcome. I had seen the Royal attempt to escape several times, knowing it wasn't a good fit against Ironheart. But the Void was just as effective on spatial magic as it was anything else. There was nowhere the Royal could run to, forcing it into a desperate struggle. The devastation around them grew, not helped by the sheer amount of ordnance my Iron Legion was distributing. Turrets never stopped firing. Artillery was at this point random, yet still fully effective, and bombs rained from the sky like a torrential rain. What had turned to an afternoon day was blotted out by planes engaging in runs without end and aerial monsters being cut down by incessant anti-air. With their sheer number, the monsters couldn't be held back forever. When afternoon turned to evening, their endless tide reached the base of the wall. When that happened, new openings were used by the troops to drop explosives and alchemical agents. Fire flooded the piles of flesh, creating hills of corpses that buried their kin alive. Knights and warlocks were dispatched to the damaged sections of the wall to hold back anything that tried to slip through. At the same time, more behemoths made their way toward the wall from the rear of the scourge lines, charging with reckless abandon in an attempt to punch more openings in our defenses. They were met with missiles and bombs, oftentimes catching no small amount of artillery shells. The brigadiers previously assigned to attack those behemoths were retasked to meet more scourge royals in head-on battle. Many royals came from aerial mounts that dropped them on top of the wall, while others simply crossed no man's land so they could enter the openings. With advanced sensors, they were all spotted. None managed to slip past and wreak havoc, but there were still plenty of them. The high-end battles were still a weak point of Iron Legion. We didn't have the sheer numbers of brigadiers and marshals, but we did have quality. Better armor, better weapons, better support. High authority ordnance was used like candy in order to weaken or attempt to outright kill authority 10 and 11 royals. Even if they didn't die, though, it often put them at enough of a disadvantage that allowed my own brigadiers and marshals to dispatch them with greater ease. A single marshal and brigadier could be stretched to handle multiple enemies of equal strength. Not to mention, they had been engaging in active battles these past few years, not idle like they once were in the kingdom's military. They were sharp and ready for what came. Evening of the first day passed. Night attempted to bring darkness upon the battlefield and was rebuffed by the rage of fire and the deployment of light flares. The battle simply continued. Ironheart continued to dominate his opponent with visceral intensity that could be felt for miles, but that sovereign proved resilient. Compared to others, Ironheart could be considered new on the stage. His combat prowess increased by the hour, improving and adjusting. By comparison, though, the Royal was a veteran. Although not more powerful, it was more experienced in what it meant to fight against another sovereign, which Ironheart lacked. This was his first battle against another sovereign. If he was only trying to make it run, then the battle would have ended after a handful of hours. But he was trying to kill it, which was significantly more difficult. Night became day once more, the morning sun peeking over the horizon and removing the need for light flares. The battle continued to rage without end. By this point, most royals within the Scourge's armies were killed, and the ones yet to be handled, those hiding in the rear lines, were being hunted by Sector 4 units like my Desert Eagles. There was now little threat to my troops still within the wall, and in just that day, Around half of the Scourge's force had been utterly eradicated. No man's land was completely filled with corpses, little of the ground visible within a quarter-mile. Massive behemoth corpses acted like natural walls, and the lakes of blood that soaked the flesh of their former hosts created a moat that was difficult for most monsters to traverse quickly. The tide was slowed, muddied, and the turrets took advantage of that. They continued to fire without end, inexhaustible supplies of crystals constantly entering their ammo belts. Reserves of everything except earth crystals were still stable. Morning turned to afternoon, and Ironheart was still fighting that royal. I didn't stop watching. I couldn't. My eyes, now unable to see visible light, remained on their battle, remembering every detail, no matter how overwhelming for my psyche. With every clash, with every minute and hour, I could see the Great Barrier come closer. With the fulfillment of everything I predicted would happen, I was reassured of my path. And through my observation of their battle, I eventually became able to read it. No longer was it random. Unlike others around my level that I could read and react to like a book, they were completely unfathomable. Until now, I saw Ironheart's actions become thoughtless, and in that they became unknowable. The royal was no longer able to try and predict like I would, nor could it read his aura to glean his thoughts and patterns. He had entered another state of being, one wholly dedicated to the battle. He didn't even have to think about what he wanted to do. His body led him, not his mind. Instincts honed over decades of battle guided his actions. And then, new knowledge of how his power interacted with other sovereigns drove him to see the abilities it afforded him. He saw the path forward, and so he charged down it blindly, reaping all of its bountiful consequences. It was around noon of the second day that it finally cascaded. Ironheart's advantages grew to a point where the royal could no longer resist. From there, its downfall was exponential. Its injuries became wounds, which became mortal blows. Its power, despite not being drained, couldn't even be used. Ironheart would react too fast, move too effectively. He was in a flow state that wouldn't end until one of them died. As soon as I saw the cascade, I sent some signals to my generals. Then I continued watching as Ironheart dispatched that royal. Every strike of the blade tore through its defenses, the royal forced to block more than deflect, which consumed more mana. Backed into a corner, it hunkered down and started to bite back, uncaring of the expenditure it knew didn't matter. The mana in the atmosphere started going haywire. The winds moved like a hurricane and the ground shifted like a 9.0 earthquake. The royal's magic went wide-scale once more, its focus on the line, not on Ironheart. I sighed, and then I watched the attack fill the world around me. It extended for miles, a last-ditch effort. I could see the infinite amount of 3- and 4-dimensional arrays that filled the world. I watched it construct tangible structures of fire, space, and earth. They all fused, not merely supplementing each other, but becoming something else entirely, as if they were creating a new element. And then I finally saw it. The conceptual of the sovereign royal I had been facing for the past several months. The one that led to the death of my friends. Cataclysm. When the arrays activated, my mind went white, then shut itself off to the world. I wasn't sure what happened after that, but the events were nearly instant. When I opened my mind's eye once more, I saw Ironheart standing there with the royal's head, right in the middle of the battlefield. I also saw the wall, 2 large portions of it to my left and right completely missing, deleted from existence. Those blows carved 2 massive fissures deep into the planet, magma bubbling up from the cracks, initially explosive, then slowing to a flow. It must have killed a couple thousand of my troops with that single blow, yet it could have been far worse. Thankfully, Ironheart had killed it in time. The battle came to a standstill, soon resuming as everyone recovered. Artillery never stopped, and the remaining Scourge were stunned in place with their sovereign dead. I estimated a bit less than 1 million remaining. It would be an easy cleanup, but something even I didn't expect happened soon after. Every monster and royal that remained regained themselves and promptly turned around to run away as fast as possible. Turrets continued to fire, and planes adjusted their bombing runs. Yet they still ran. Something about that pissed me off to no end. I held the orders I wanted to give, Ironheart appearing next to me with a step. As agreed, I will keep the corpse. Of course. Are you all right, Sir Cooper? Ironheart frowned at me. I turned my head toward him, even though I couldn't see him. He shook his head. You blinded yourself watching the battle. Good thing it is temporary. Not an affliction of the eyes, then. Correct. It is of the mind. You were watching things you weren't meant to understand yet. But that you could see it at all means you're moving toward the Great Barrier. Yes, I am. Go ahead and rest, Chief Ironheart. We will handle the rest. Will you give chase? I scanned him, seeing his battered body still glistening with unknowable arrays and runes of the ether. I'm going to do more than give chase. But my soldiers need time to rest. We will prepare until then. Very well. Inform me should you need me. I have much to reflect on. Ironheart left with those words, dropping into the wall, and I continued to watch the retreating monsters, their pitiful aura weakening with every ounce of lost confidence.